What's up, guys? So a lot of people are pissed off about the creative direction that Battlefield has taken recently. I'm referring, of course, to the decision to not only include female soldiers, but to heavily promote and glorify them as fearless badasses in the marketing and in the game story. Also, I do mean a lot of people are pissed off. There are more people upset with this decision than the number of female soldiers in World War II. This isn't just some fringe minority either. White cis males are pissed off, and this is why that's a good thing. So here are some of the most common arguments or tactics that people that defend the decision are using, and the reason why they are bad arguments. Many people have argued that as a business, EA has no choice but to pander to social justice warriors, or else they may face boycotting and go out of business or something like that. Or they argue that as a business, they have to pander to women and blacks in order to expand the gaming demographics, meaning that if they add more black female characters, it will get more black women to play the game and increase their total revenue. This is false. No matter how many black women with big hairdos game developers insert into games, it does not seem to do anything. For whatever reason, black women just do not seem to like playing video games as much as white males or black males do. Gaming seems to be a male activity. You may have heard about some misleading studies being mentioned in the past about how things are changing and how women are now most of the gamers, or about 50% of gamers are now female. But that's only true if you count things like Candy Crush or Facebook as gaming. If you only look at certain games like Counter-Strike or Arma 3, it is probably one black woman for every 500 white males playing. You can debate why that is the case, and it is in my opinion that it has evolutionary explanations. But the point is that it's a fact that this recent trend of adding sassy black women to games has not magically turned black women into gamers.
You have a problem?
Yeah, I got a problem with you.
The other business-related argument that they have to pander to SJWs is also false. There is no data whatsoever that suggests that SJWs have any sort of economic boycotting power. In fact, there is evidence that this pandering is actually costing companies that produce film, TV, and video games. These companies are actually taking a loss by inserting black, midget, lesbian, tranny, handicapped characters into their games. And it also seems clear that the companies are aware of this hit that they are taking. So if anything, the question is, why are they taking a loss to promote some agenda that most people don't want? Either way, it is clear that SJWs are actually a vocal minority, and business won't suffer from ignoring their screeching, and if anything, they would make more money by doing so. Another common tactic is to mention that the game is fiction, and they will often point out some other unrealistic aspects about the game, like respawning, or adding weapons that didn't exist yet in that time period, or something like that. So let's talk about something called suspension of disbelief. The term refers to the aspect of a story where the audience is expected to ignore some unrealistic or inaccurate thing and not be bothered by it. Suspension of disbelief has rules though, or else if it goes beyond the rules, the audience can no longer suspend the disbelief and it takes them out of the story. The way it works is that you are allowed to add fake things into your story if the fake thing is necessary and enhances your story. Anything beyond that is bad and the audience will hate it. For example, to make a Superman movie, you have to grant the premise that aliens with powers exist, or else you can't have the Superman movie. So the audience allows it. When Superman flies around, nobody complains about it being fake or unrealistic because it is within their suspended disbelief. The fact that Superman can do these unrealistic things is necessary for the Superman story, and it enhances it. Right, the Superman movie is better because he can fly around and stuff like that. This is different than unrealistically inserting women and black people into World War I and World War II games. Were the female soldiers in a World War II game necessary? Like it's necessary to have powers to make a Superman movie? Did it enhance the game? The answer is no to both of these. It didn't. It's not necessary. The game would not be worse if it had no female skins. Superman would be worse if he had no powers. In addition to it just being forced and unrealistic, some people argue that it's harmful to have this propaganda in the game because it will actually mislead people that don't know anything, and that people will actually begin to think that it is realistic and accurate. People that defend EA's decisions will then reply something about it just being fiction, like, hey man, it's just a fictional game. Nobody will actually think it's supposed to be realistic, but it's already begun. In less than a month, it went from people saying it's just fiction, who cares, to saying that it is accurate because they found some Wikipedia article about some lady that was once involved in some comfy non-combat role position, or about this one ragtag militia that once had some women in it. So they already are starting to believe that it is accurate. So yes, what people warned would happen is already happening. People literally get their worldviews from movies and games. People often cite Harry Potter and Star Wars when discussing politics. People actually believe women make just as good frontline soldiers as men because of their depiction as badass men in women's skins in TV and film. So this takes us to the next tactic, which is finding some examples of some women that were involved in some capacity in World War II, and then saying, aha, see, this is accurate. Here is why that's false. As many other people have already mentioned, women in the military were extremely rare, number one, and even when they did exist, they were almost never in frontline combat, which is what this game is about. Even when they were involved in combat, which was extremely rare itself, it was either something like sniping from far away or flying airplanes. One way we can know this is by comparing how deadly male and women roles were in World War II. So let's look at the US as an example, since it's one of the few that actually had data on it. The US had a total of about 16 million people enlisted, of which 291,557 were killed in battle. Out of those 16 million, 350,000 were women. So how do we know that these 350,000 women were not doing the same dangerous jobs as the men were? Because only 16 of the deaths were women. So once more, out of 16 million, 291,500 men died, which means that for every 100,000 soldiers, 1,800 of them died. But for women, for every 100,000 soldiers, only 4.5 died. This means that men in World War II were about 402 times more likely to die than a woman that was in World War II. So let's say that there was a woman somewhere that fought in frontline hand-to-hand combat and won. Does that make this game accurate? Does one woman or 10 women or 1,000 women somewhere make it accurate to make a game where 1 in 10 soldiers in the American infantry are women? What about performance? When you play as a woman in this game, do you run slower? Do you have more recoil when using LMGs? So no, women in frontline combat were virtually non-existent, and they would have been inferior to the male soldiers. So they were obviously used as a last resort, last-ditch effort, used as cannon fodder. While in this game, they are prominent badasses that don't even have any fear, spouting one-liners while kicking ass and taking names. How many times do you think a woman in World War II did this?
Hello, old friend.
Probably literally 0 times. Once the SJW has lost and has been defeated, has no more arguments to make, they will then start to say things like, why do you even care what race or sex the character is? It doesn't change the story or the gameplay. Well, if it doesn't matter what race or sex the character is, then let's leave it at white males. Oh, what's that? All of a sudden it does matter? Oh, only when it's black women does it not matter what the sex or race is, but if it's a white male, then it starts mattering, right? You'll see comments by black people or women talking about white males being so fragile and insecure that they need the characters to be white, but it's the opposite. EA clearly seems to think that blacks and women are the ones that need pandering, since they pander to them. The only time white males complain is when they have a good reason to complain, where it makes sense to complain. Black people and women complain about a lack of representation even when it doesn't make sense, such as asking why a movie about ancient Greece doesn't have a black tranny playing Aristotle. Aside from the hypocrisy, white people don't really care what the race is, which is why they still eat McDonald's even though every McDonald's commercial has obligatory black people in it. People in marketing are aware that whites will still shop at Target or eat Big Macs, so they pander to other people. White people never complain when a movie about Michael Jordan has a black actor, or when Tomb Raider plays as a female, but black women as German soldiers is just retarded. Here is why it matters. People are aware what the motivation for these decisions is. When you play as a female in Tomb Raider, it isn't in response to some fraudulent SJW movement that hates white men. When the cover of a World War I game has a black man, and the cover for a World War II game has a woman, that isn't a coincidence. It didn't happen by accident. It wasn't like some artist drew a bunch of different cover art, and people just randomly landed on those two. They were deliberate. It was one of those, so how are we doing for diversity discussions. It's there to deliberately remove the white male for the sake of appeasing women and blacks. When a World War I game has a white man on the cover, it's because it makes sense, not as a political propaganda move. Nobody likes to be preached to by the content they purchase for fun. It is no different than if the cover had an invitation to join the Church of Scientology. In fact, that would be even better because it wouldn't be motivated by a hatred of white men, as the social justice movements that lead to these decisions are. Your chimp brain is aware of this subconsciously, and that is why it doesn't like it. That's why it matters. It puts the pieces together and goes, wait a minute, I don't like this. And it isn't because you're misogynistic or racist and hate women, as SJWs would claim. They are so retarded that they literally think that the reason men didn't want women to fight in wars is because they hate women. So to conclude, the complaints are all correct. They are right to be upset. The game is no better with these changes. Just because it happened once somewhere doesn't make it accurate. It would be like being able to play as a 12-year-old soldier just because it actually happened once. Have you Googled Calvin Graham, sweetie? Someone didn't pay attention in history class. Just because there were 12-year-olds in World War II doesn't mean that it would be accurate to make 1 in 10 characters and the cover art a 12-year-old boy. Stepping on white men to appease black women will not get black women to buy your game, and it will only serve to irritate white men and irritate people that don't hate white men. The changes don't enhance the gameplay or story. The female characters are always terrible and written like asshole men, since apparently that's what people think a male is. So when they want to write a woman as empowered, they write them the way they would write an asshole male. Nobody empathizes with them. Women have qualities that people like and would enhance the characters, but the developers are scared of leaving any trace of femininity. They are scared to write the female as imperfect, fearful, vulnerable, compassionate, and leave only the worst characteristics out of fear of being called misogynist, and create Mary Sues. This leaves an empty shell that nobody cares about. No amount of social engineering will ever override biology. Your chimp brain will always notice when these characters are written as males in female skin suits, and it will not like it nor sympathize. No amount of propaganda will achieve this utopia where 50% of Counter-Strike players are black women, or 50% of soldiers in real-life frontline combat roles are female, because biology doesn't care about your utopian dreams. If it wasn't broken, don't fix it. As always, this has been Professor Noob Hero.